like me when you guys got here. So.
We both wanted to watch it.
That's just audio.
Huh?
That's just audio. If you want a video of it, it is on YouTube. So.
Yeah, we know.
Okay.
Yeah, YouTube we can get,
Yeah.
but we couldn't get what was going on.
Well, good morning.
Good morning.
If you got your Bibles, we're going to be continuing on in Daniel. Daniel chapter 3. We're going to be talking about another in the fire. So I guess you probably guess what the subject is today with a title like Another in the Fire, right? Let's go ahead and open up in a word of prayer this morning. Lord, I thank you so much for this day. I thank you for the opportunity that we have to be in your house. And I pray, Father, that you guide this lesson this morning, God, that we'd be inspired by what you have for us. In the name of Jesus, we pray. Amen. Now, Daniel had told Nebuchadnezzar that the golden head of the statue in his dream. Now, just refreshing your memories, he had a dream. He was going to kill all of the astrologers, magicians, and all those guys if somebody couldn't give him the interpretation of it. And Daniel was able to do so. So Daniel explained to him, this statue and its parts are different kingdoms. And the golden head of the statue is your kingdom, Nebuchadnezzar. So what does the king do next? He builds a statue. he builds a statue and then calls his subjects to worship it. And it is probably, because I've never spoken to the author of Daniel, so I don't know for sure that this was their intention. But it was probably their intention to highlight that irony, to immediately after talking about Daniel's dream about a statue and how it's going to be destroyed by God, for the king to then build a statue of himself and make people bow down and before it. So there's, it's probably to be some amusement on the king's behalf. That the reader should be appalled at his actions because, the immediacy of these two actions, one right after the other, is supposed to be apparent to the reader that this is ridiculous behavior. And so the Jewish captives are presented as wise and thoughtful and faithful to God and strong character, standing before this king and making these requests, about the food, and then asking the king not to kill them all, give me a couple days, and with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego standing up before the king, while the Babylonian king, on the other hand, comes across as ignorant and impulsive and impetuous. He's just not coming across as a very smart individual. It's intentional. The author of Daniel is intending that. We today call it propaganda. You find a lot of it in the Bible, that the author of a book will definitely highlight the ignorance of the protagonist in the story, like Nebuchadnezzar, while highlighting the faithfulness of the antagonist, in this case Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So let's take a look at Daniel chapter 3, starting with verse 1. King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold 90 feet high, 9 feet wide, and set it upon the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. He then summoned the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all other provincial officials to come to the dedication of the image he set up. So the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all other provincial officials assembled for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and they stood before it. Then the herald loudly proclaimed, "This is what you are commanded to do, O peoples, nations, and men of every language. As soon as you hear the sound of a horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace." Therefore, as soon as they heard the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, and all kinds of music, all the people, nations, and men of every language fell down and worshiped the image of the gold that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. All right, just pause there for a second. So, the Scottish theologian P.T. Forsyth once said, "Unless there is within us that which is above us, we shall soon yield to that which is around us." In other words, if we aren't filled with God's Spirit and committed to serving Him, we'll soon blend in with the culture around us. And because of the proportions listed in 3:1, there's a good chance that this wasn't what we would think of as statue, like a human, like the statue of David, that Da Vinci, carved out of stone type of thing. It's probably not something, in that order. It's something that's 90 foot tall and a statue like that. Most likely, it was more of an obelisk-shaped, something similar to what we would see in the Washington Monument in Washington, D.C., the tall obelisk type thing, maybe with some kind of carving on it of the image of the king. But it doesn't really matter exactly what it looked like. It's just that the sheer size of the thing would kind of give us an indication that, given the time frame, that's not something that they typically did in their culture, something that large. They were just the artistry and the technology to do something that big as a carved statue wasn't within their grasp at that point. But they did do obelisks. They did a lot of those. Verse 4 specifies that there were people, multiple ethnicities there, likely indicating that Nebuchadnezzar had appointed not just Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and Daniel from foreign countries to be leaders within the country. He was also assigning other rulers throughout his nation and the provinces of the people that he had conquered. As he was conquering them, picking out the best of their society and putting them in authority after some proper training, putting them in charge of different areas. So he calls all of them to show up and to show off his new statue that he had carved out for his purposes. He wants to bring everybody in and to have a big celebration about it. And it wasn't until they arrived and were at this celebratory celebration or ceremony that he had then revealed to them this ultimatum: bow down or be executed. And disobedient subjects are going to be thrown into a blazing furnace. Now, this suggests that there was a huge kiln that most likely, and just this is a lot of speculation, but given the proximity to the statue that he had just built, there's a real good chance, and I mean, as a king, I would think this would be a bit of poetic justice to use the kiln that I used to melt down the metals to create this obelisk to then kill anybody who refuses to bow down to it. So a lot of archaeologists, scholars, biblical scholars, believe that these were probably the furnaces used in constructing this statue. And so the crowd took the ultimatum seriously because there is historical context for it. This was not an unusual punishment. There's even biblical context, not necessarily for Nebuchadnezzar, but for other kings of this era using similar methods to execute people, that they would just throw them into a furnace that was used to melt down metals. And so as soon as the music began to play, all the people then began to bow down before this because they did not want to be thrown into that fiery furnace. And just keep in mind that we are talking about, it lists out, the governors, the judges, the prefects. These are all the leaders of all these different provinces and areas of control within Babylon, and they've been called together. So this is the king. They have a much, stronger connection to the king. So they don't have any reason to doubt his sincerity when he says, I will throw you into the fiery furnace. So they all bow down. Verse 8. At this time, some astrologers came forward and denounced the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. You have issued a decree, O king, that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and all kinds of music must fall down and worship the image of gold, and that whoever does not fall down and worship will be thrown into a blazing furnace. But there are some Jews whom you have set over the affairs of province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who pay no attention to you, O king. They neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold you have set up. Furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king, and Nebuchadnezzar said to them, Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold I have set up? Now when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and all kinds of music, if you are ready to fall down and worship the image I made, very good. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand? Now, as I pointed out before, there are definitely some literary styles that are pretty universal through the ages. So the author of Daniel is using what we refer to as drama. He's building, or they are building, because I don't know who wrote Daniel. They are building drama. We definitely can feel that at this moment that the tension is building in the story. And although it appears that everyone is bowing down to this idol, there were a few Jewish men in Babylon who weren't going to be so quick to follow the king's command. And it says that the king's astrologers were the ones who informed him that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego refused to worship the statue. And in verse 3, they were not listed among the people, the astrologers weren't listed as people required to bow down to the statue. That doesn't mean that they didn't, but it's once again the author is trying to draw these distinctions between those people and our people. And so instead, those astrologers were part of the group that had been upstaged by Daniel in chapter 2. Remember, the king called them forward and said, tell me what my dream is, talk to your gods, and tell me what my dream is, and then interpret it. And they're all like, I can't do that. That's not reasonable to even ask of us. So they were upstaged when Daniel was able to. Immediately, just like the king immediately building the statue, immediately in chapter 3, we now see these people looking at those 3 Jewish men and calling them out. It does not appear that this was by accident. Yes.
Where's Daniel in all
I don't know, honestly. I really don't. And that there is no mention as to why he's not part of the story, even though the book is named, his name. It doesn't really say specifically why. But with him being the right-hand man of the king, he may have been off doing his duties someplace else.
He may have been praying somewhere.
He may have been praying somewhere else. I mean, because and honestly, I don't know. Do I, for a moment, doubt that if he was there, he was one of the people bowing down? No, I don't, because I think the author would have said something about it if he was part of it. I just, for whatever reason, do not believe he was part of this story. I mean, like physically removed from being part of this story for whatever reason. It doesn't mention why, doesn't give us an indication, but knowing the history from the first 2 books and what happens for the rest of this book, this is really the only instance where Daniel is not part of the scenario. Don't know why. Wish I did. We can ask him when we get there. Where were you at, Daniel? When we all get to heaven. Daniel, what were you doing on that day because you didn't show up? But I don't know.
We won't care then.
Yeah. But, I mean, given the fact of his relationship with them, that he had, after the dream scenario, had requested the king to appoint these 3 guys, give them, because they were with me, they were praying, they were talking to my God as well, to give them a place of honor because of their dedication as well. It wasn't just me. He was quick to point that out about these 3 guys. So,
He knew what was going on, I think, because in the chapter before, the last verse was, Daniel sat in the gate of the king.
right.
So he was out
He-
there where.
Well, I was going to say, he had he not just a gatekeeper, but he had the ear of the king. So, yeah, he was like, if you wanted to speak to the king, you had to get through Daniel. That's the picture that they're painting, is that Daniel had the opinion of the king. Why he was silent the whole time the king is building this statue? King, do you not forget the dream that I just interpreted? I mean, why he's not saying something of, do you remember what happened in that dream to the statue in that dream? Why would you build a statue? Why would you try to test God that way? I mean, so to me, this whole chapter 3 really paints a scenario for whatever reason that Daniel is MIA for the whole thing.
He knew God had it.
Yeah, well, I'm not even so sure he knew what was going on, because like I said, I get the impression just from the way chapter 3 reads, he was out of the loop, completely out of the loop. Because I think in just the way Daniel typically is in the book of Daniel, that if he knew something like this was going on, he would have been, beelining it straight to the king saying, whoa, hold on a second here. This is not a good plan. This is not smart at all. But it says nothing about it. So for whatever reason, he was out of the loop. Don't know.
They couldn't text him either.
No. No, there is no picking up the cell phone.
Hey, Daniel, we got a problem.
Yeah. Shadrach, Meshach, Daniel, do you know what the king is doing? I mean, no, none of that. But it indicates, though, that nobody knew what the king's plan was until they showed up. Until they just think they've been invited to some kind of big celebration. So, I mean, honestly, if, another king's party, and if I had an excuse to be in Timbuktu at that moment when there was going to be a big party in Babylon, I would have, king, I need to go someplace else. and go do this thing that's real important over here somewhere, anything right now. Just get me out of Babylon right now. I could see, that type of scenario. And then when they all show up and the king makes this type of announcement, he's not going to know anything about it. So, don't know. I don't know why. But, like I said, we do know that the tension is building between these three guys and the astrologers who had been embarrassed by Daniel in the prior chapter. They couldn't interpret the king's dream. They couldn't even tell the king what his dream was. So whenever they see these guys that they know that are friends of Daniel, these Jews, they call them out because of jealousy, most likely. It's jealousy. And they probably see an opportunity then to bring Daniel and his crew down a notch while lifting them. Hey, king, we're loyal. We're here to support you, but do you see those guys over there? I mean, to lift themselves up in the king's eye. And it uses the word Jews here. And this is the only time in the book of Daniel that the word is used. And this is probably hinting at a anti-Semitic issue. That's the term we use now, is anti-Semitic. They were not fans of the Jewish people. These astrologers weren't. So by the fact that they're using the term Jews really gives us an indication that they were more or less using it as a racial slur. This wasn't just saying, these Jewish people. No, this was like as a racial slur against them. Since it's Daniel and his crew don't refer to themselves that way, nobody else in the Bible, in Daniel, refers to them as Jews. These guys do, but not in a kind way. So it comes across as a racial slur. And so they're calling them out before the king, and the king calls them before him, and he gives them a very clear choice: bow down or die. And this really seems out of character for the king to give him another chance. I mean, to build the statue, to require people to bow down, that's not out of character. But he said he's going to kill them if they didn't, and now he's giving them a second chance to do so. So he is definitely addressing them with somebody he has respect for, but anger towards. It really kind of gives us an indication of how much respect these three guys really do have with the king, that he just didn't kill them, that he didn't follow through with it, but that he's giving them a second chance. That's not normal for Nebuchadnezzar. That's not his character. So it really does paint a picture of, he's angry, yes. I'm not going to allow insubordination, but because of who you are, I'm going to give you one more shot. And so he has accepted God's ability to communicate through dreams and through these four Hebrew men, but he's rejecting God's authority over his life and his kingdom. I recognize your God as being powerful. I don't recognize him as being more powerful than me. So it really comes across that way. Let's take a look at verse 16. Daniel chapter 3, verse 16. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to save us from it, and he will rescue us from your hand, O king. But even if he does not, we want you to know, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. To me, that is probably one of the most powerful scriptures in the Bible. Those two scriptures right there together. I have faith in my God to deliver me from you. But if my God chooses not to, I am still not going to bow down to your idol. I fear my God more than I fear you. Yes, ma'am.
How brave.
Oh, it was.
They were but youngsters.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's what we discussed and I don't know how much time has passed between chapter 2 and chapter 3. We really don't. We have no idea. But in chapter 2, when we were discussing it, 19, early 20s. That's the expected age of these 4 men.
That's not really, nowadays, I don't know about back then, but nowadays, they really don't have their heads screwed on very good.
The brain doesn't fully develop until 25.
And a lot has to do with how they were raised.
Yes. Well, in what they've seen. They watched the destruction of their nation because of their people's disobedience to God. They watched that happen. There is strong indication that Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, and Daniel were all in Jerusalem when it was destroyed. When they watched the temple be destroyed. When they watched the king's palace be destroyed. When they watched the walls be torn down. They were there. They were kidnapped, hauled off to another country, brought before, into this group of young men, and basically, to test, to see how smart they were, to see how charismatic they were. I mean, all of that happened while they were young teenagers. Can you imagine the trauma that those 4 guys experienced? And now to stand before the king, and instead of having that fear, that come over them, the anxiety of the trauma in their life, but to have that strength.
They stuck together, one of them could have said, I'm not going to do it, I'm not going to get burned up.
Right.
But none of them.
Yeah, they all 3 of them stuck together. They did. King, we don't need a second chance. Doesn't matter if you give us a second chance, a third chance, a fourth chance. Doesn't matter how many chances you have. We are not going to bow down before your idol. Our God will deliver us. And even if he don't, it's not going to change my mind. I would rather die in that fiery furnace than to disappoint my God.
What faith.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying. These guys exemplified confidence. The Matthew 10:28, the confidence that Jesus talked about is, don't be afraid of those who can kill your body. They cannot touch your soul. Fear only God who can destroy both soul and body in hell. That's what they feared.
Now, just for a second, I just thought, they're not even in the book of faith, are they?
No. It's not specifically, not specific. It does talk about them not by name.
But it says other heroes, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, it makes this broad, but it also talks about, I can't remember exactly how it phrases it, but it does give an indication that it's, about being burned and stuff like that. Yeah. Yeah, so, no, they didn't get called out by name, but it does kind of strongly infer that's who they're referring to. But yeah, so I'm not going to be distracted by your ultimatum, King.
You can't scare me.
Yeah, I'm not going to be scared by it. I didn't bow the first time. I'm not going to bow the second time. There's really no need for you to give us a second chance. If you're going to throw us into the fiery furnace, you might as well go ahead and do so. Just do it.
Get it over with.
Yeah, because God alone is worthy, and he can spare us from the fire. However, they recognize the fact that just because God could save them, it did not guarantee that he would save them. And that's, to me, actually one of the book of Job, that is, to me, the main point. A lot of people point out how faithful Job was. The main point to Job is that the Lord giveth, the Lord taketh away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. I don't care if he's giving, I don't care if he's taking. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And that is what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego is saying. I don't care if we survive, I don't care if we die. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Not you, king. You're just somebody God set up. You are an instrument. You are a tool that our God used. That's all you are. I'm not going to be afraid of the tool. I'm going to be afraid of the one wielding the tool. And so they remain faithful to God. All right, verse 19. Then Nebuchadnezzar was furious. He didn't give him a second chance. We skipped over the second chance. He was furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and his attitude toward them changed. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times hotter than usual, and commanded some of the strongest soldiers in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the blazing furnace. So these men were wearing their robes, trousers, turbans, and other clothes were bound and thrown into the blazing furnace. The king's command was so urgent, the furnace was so hot that the flames of the fire killed the soldiers who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and these 3 men, firmly tied, fell into the blazing furnace.
So, hold it just a second.
Go ahead.
My thought was that those, I never thought this before. Who threw them in if those men died because of the heat?
Well,
Did
and,
it just say they fell in?
yeah, well, and that's actually, no, it is. And that's because of the way we're thinking the furnace works. It's not,
I think it was God.
well, it's more of a pit. The furnace that they would use would be something that you would throw things into, not that you would, like we think of furnaces now, I think of like glass furnaces, where they're shoving it through this door type of thing. That it's more of a top fed, not a side fed.
Like a hole.
Yes, like a hole. So that's why most, religious scholars believe that it was more of a, and that is in line with the type that they would use during that time as well, is be more of a top fed. So as the guys are walking up and trying to throw them in, they're more or less just falling over and, dropping them in as, yeah. Yeah, and they fell down dead themselves as they're throwing them in because of the heat from it. So, but we're reaching this climax here with Nebuchadnezzar's fit of rage, and he's following through on his threat, and they, up to this point, the book of Daniel, in the book of Daniel, the faith of Jewish captives had not led to persecution. It brought them right up to the brink of it. Daniel requested that they get special foods at the risk of being killed, was not killed. Asked the king for more time to interpret the dream at the risk of being killed, but was not killed. In all intents and purposes, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego should have been killed. I mean, it wasn't because the king wasn't trying to kill them. Previously, there was no attempt to actually try it. There was threats of killing them. There was no attempt to. There was a full-on attempt this time that failed.
So this was a big, huge hit?
Yes, it was a big fire. I'm not saying that you couldn't see it from the side. Yeah, but it's a more of a pit-type situation where they would throw the metals into it, build a huge fire, throw the metals in, let it melt down. Then when they get it out, then they can kind of form it into the shape that they want.
It would have to be big enough for them to walk around in.
Yes.
Later on,
That's, well, and I'm not sure if you were in here at the time, when we talked about the statue to begin with, the size of it, we're assuming that this was the furnace that they used to help create his statue. the location, the proximity of it to the statue, the time, that he just finished the thing. Chances are, if it is a big hot furnace that they hadn't even shut them down yet, they were still using that
The
furnace.
statue was gold, wasn't it?
It was,
So gold is a soft metal, so it wouldn't take a whole lot to melt.
yes, yeah, but it would take a large furnace to create one as tall as this thing was. So,
They probably did it in sections.
right, right. And so, they heated it up. And once again, we've talked about this before, that sometimes they use phrasing. We refer to them now as euphemisms.
Say it again, I didn't hear you.
Sometimes we use phrasing that are sometimes we refer to as euphemisms. Yeah, so cold as ice, that's a euphemism. Is it really, that cold out? No, probably not. But it's cold out, it's that indication. When I say it, you know what I'm talking about. Well, when he says, that it's heated up 7 times hotter than, that was probably just a euphemism saying, make that thing as hot as you possibly can. And so that's what they did. They used this furnace, heated it up, superheated the furnace, got the super strong soldiers. Once again, remember what I was talking about earlier about propaganda. These are all things that the author of Daniel is trying to point out. Hottest it could possibly be. Biggest soldiers he could possibly get his hands on. Everything is the biggest. The king is the angriest. He's the meanest. He's using this super hot furnace. He's using super mean, strong soldiers. These 3 guys have no chance. That's the author is really highlighting these things, that there's no chance for them to avoid punishment. There is no chance of them avoiding death, that they can't escape all of this. And so instead of doing this in an orderly fashion, the king, true to his character, creates a chaotic, violent scene of retribution. I can't believe you guys would behave this way. I mean, he's just going nuts and crazy about this. And there's no due process. There's no court. There's no decorum to any of this. We're beyond all that. We're just a mad king who is going to throw these guys into the fiery furnace. And once again, the author is using things that you might just kind of overlook. They're still wearing their clothes, their turbans, they got their shoes on. He's doing this in such a quick fashion. Might as well take their clothes off and give them away to somebody else or sell them or something. Nope, didn't bother. Just going to throw them on, clothes and all, just throw them into the fiery furnace. And the author is including these details to paint a picture of just how crazy mad the king is. He's just such angry. But it's important as believers in God for us to remember these details later on, because it then this painting of madness and chaos and retribution falls right into the description of God's deliverance. And we'll see this in a moment. So the flames killed the soldiers as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego fell. They were firmly tied and fell into the roaring flames. All right, so let's look at verse 24. King Nebuchadnezzar leapt to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, "Weren't there 3 men that we tied up and threw into the fire?" They replied, "Certainly, O king." And he said, "Look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound, unharmed, and the 4th looks like the Son of God's." Nebuchadnezzar then approached the opening of the blazing furnace and shouted, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here." So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire. Then the satraps, prefects, governors, and royal advisors crowded around them. They saw that the fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was a hair of their head singed. Their robes were not scorched, and there was no smell of fire on them.
I would have said when he said, "Come here," I'd have said, "No,
Yeah, you come to me. You got something to say to me? You come here, right?
How did the king, okay, I'm gonna mention this. How did the king get close enough to the fire to see that there was 4 men walking?
Well, and that's what I was saying earlier. That doesn't mean that there isn't like a hole or something in the side of the furnace that we can see into it. But that's not how they loaded the coal or the wood or whatever it is that they were using to create the heat and the fire. But there was most likely some way for the person who is running the furnace to identify, the flames are going, that they needed more, that type of stuff. So there is apparently something that he can see into, that the people around can see. And don't think small, or think it small. This needed to be a large furnace. This was huge.
I was thinking maybe it burned down a little bit, but it doesn't say that. It says, but suddenly.
Yeah, oh no, there's no indication there was much time in between him throwing them in and him looking in there and seeing something.
But then he'd have to be high enough to be able to look down.
Oh, yeah. So, like I said, we can ask Daniel when we get there, or Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, because I don't know the details of, yeah, but God, and to me, this is, I think, an important, very key point of this story that was more or less foreshadowed before when they said that even if my God doesn't deliver us, He didn't deliver them from the fire. He delivered them through the fire. There's a big difference. A lot of us want to be delivered from the fire. And so, however that the king was looking in, and through the top, the door, the window, I don't know what he had. I honestly don't. But he could see inside, and he could see what was happening. And when he saw, he asked a question, how many people did we throw in? Because he was shocked to see that instead of 3 figures, he saw 4, and the 4th one looked like, and Nebuchadnezzar doesn't believe in the one and only God, so he used the term son of gods, not God, because that's what he believes in.
See, my Bible says God.
Right, it's wrong. I'm just saying it's the interpretation. The original language is God's, and little g, not big G.
But technically, that shows you that you're never alone without.
Right. It doesn't change the story, but Nebuchadnezzar doesn't believe in the one and only God. So that's not going to be his reaction.
That's according to him, it's like Daniel's.
Yes.
And it's Meshach and Shadrach's.
Yeah. So this person in the fire with them looks like the son of a god, and because they're just basically in there walking around, glowing, whatever it was, something about that person made them think of deity, or made the king think of deity. And so it was originally written in Aramaic, not Hebrew. So that verse literally reads son of gods. And so Nebuchadnezzar obviously did not have the theology that we do about the third person and the Trinity being the Son of God. And so he is calling the figure more or less an angel. And the term, it identifies them as being deity in his culture. Now, in Jewish tradition, it holds that this individual was the angel of the Lord, and that is a title often associated with what we refer to, and this is a 10-gallon word, a theophany. A theophany is what we typically interpret as being God in the present before Jesus was born. So there are a couple instances, I think of Jacob wrestling, that was a theophany. He was wrestling with the angel. That's what it was referred to as the angel of the Lord. When Joshua, he's standing out in the field, and he is approached. It is referred to as the angel of the Lord. Not just an angel, the angel of the Lord. Those are typically identified by Christians as being a theophany. So Christ in the flesh before Christ was born. But the point is that that individual is believed by the Jewish people of being significant, of not just any old angel, but the angel of the Lord. And when these guys, it's clear that when they come out, that the king made it a public spectacle to execute them. God made it a public spectacle to save them. And so not only did they not die, not only were they none of the hair was singed. I was just barbecuing yesterday and have singed hair. I mean, I just have to get close to it and I get singed hair. These guys are walking around in it, no singed hair. Clothes isn't damaged, doesn't even smell like smoke. That's why it was important earlier that the author pointed out. They're still fully clothed, still have their hats on and everything and thrown in. They come out with their hats still on. And it looks good. Looks just as good as it did when they went in. So it's very, once again, pointing out all of these things, how in the king's rush to throw them in, he didn't even remove their clothes. God made sure those clothes weren't even damaged. Only thing that burned was the rope binding them. And I'd also like to point out, there's no indication that the three of them saw the fourth person. There's real good indication they didn't even know God was walking around with them in the fire. Now, there's pretty good indication when they come walking back out, right? But there is no indication that while they were in there that they had that confidence because they could see God in there. They didn't. They just believed. And when they started walking around, it says they're just walking around in there praising God. I'm sure they probably, I don't know. According to Jewish tradition, it says they were singing praises. According to the Jewish writings. Don't know. The Bible doesn't specifically say what they were doing or saying. It just says they were walking around there and the king's like, well, how many people are supposed to be in there? Because I see 4. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego doesn't say how many they saw. All right, verse 28. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, "Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's command and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve and worship the God except their own God. Therefore I decree that the people of any nation or language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be cut into pieces and their houses be turned into a pile of rubble, for no other God can save in this way." Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. Now, chapter 3 ends similarly to chapter 2, where Nebuchadnezzar is declaring how great the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego is that he is, this Lord over all kings. And now after witnessing another miracle in chapter 3, the Lord of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, he's referring to him like he did with Daniel, the Lord of Daniel, the God of Daniel. And anyone who speaks out in chapter 3 here, he's talking about anybody who speaks out against him, their houses are going to be torn down. The people are going to be ripped to shreds. Don't even speak against this God. And so it really, the king's heart seemed to be that, not necessarily that he was now a follower of that one true God, but he was trying to appease that God. Don't destroy me. I see how powerful you are, so let me hedge my bet and make your followers important.
But he did acknowledge that their God was the God of all gods.
He is, but it doesn't acknowledge that he is a follower of that God.
Correct.
Even the demons admit that Jesus is the Son of God.
Correct.
So acknowledging his power and turning my power over to him is two entirely different things. And when you read the book of Daniel, you find out that is definitely within Nebuchadnezzar's nature. I don't want your God to be mad at me because I think he's powerful, but I'm still king. Right? So this actually marks Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's exit. For such a powerful story that we think so much about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, we're in chapter 3 and that's it for them. They had such an impact on Jewish culture and even Christian culture that in those 3 short chapters, they become to such prominence in just 3 chapters. This is the exit for them. And so they chose to obey God in the face of death, and they are a great example to us. That commitment that they have is a great example to us in 3 short chapters. That commitment is a huge example to us. They surrendered to God's will, and he showed that he is able to rescue. But I still love their attitude, but even if he doesn't, I am still not going to bow down. Join with me in prayer. Lord, I thank you so much for this day. I thank you for the opportunity that we have to look at your word and to look at these 3 individuals. In the name of Jesus, I pray.